Talk about next is just some of these issues that you can have as you go up in altitude and where you can actually get life-threatening type of events occurring. And one of the things I'll probably do as well is I have a little video that I put some questions in and stuff like that, but there's one that was showing hypoxia and kind of what hypoxia does to the brain, and that's really, to me, one of these interesting ones here. There is a lot as we start going up in altitude, especially when you start getting to very low levels of oxygen. Our cerebral cortex is quite sensitive to changes in arterial O2 saturation in it, so that CaO2 that's up there. Once we start getting oxygen levels below 100 millimeters of mercury, so above about 10,000 feet, we can start seeing some major changes in mental and motor functioning. And sometimes with these severe decompressions, like on a plane or hypoxia, and I'll show you, pull up a video and put it in there to show you this, but this hypoxia can be, I mean, it's almost like people are drunk. I mean, it's a euphoric, almost like they're wasted type of thing going on. It's quite interesting with this neurological impairment. And obviously, different things are going to influence this. Again, depending on what you're doing, how used you are to doing a particular task, how difficult it is, if you've mastered it before, and then obviously all those things are going to play a very big role depending on how high a level of hypoxia there is. Like one of the videos I'm going to show you is just as these little things put in a square, writing something, and it's something that you'd be very familiar with. And this is showing somebody at 25,000 feet with more of a severe decompression, and you can see within minutes they are almost not capable of doing the activity. So as you go up in altitude, again, depends on how much you've been exposed to altitude before, if you've had any type of acclimation to it. But you can see as you start getting up into these higher levels of altitude, that 10,000 feet, you're going to have issues with light sensitivity and headaches, attention span, memory recall as you start getting up above 15,000 feet. Reaction time decreases as you start getting up in the 20,000 feet area. So these reductions in oxygen are definitely going to play a role in your cognitive abilities and your ability to kind of function normally. As we get into these really severe things here, I've seen videos where somebody is having trouble putting words together. And again, that's when you start getting into dangerous areas here. So high altitude illness there's a number of different levels to this, but again, none of them are particularly good. But hypoxia can be a major issue, especially mountain climbing, and this is one of the things that people that are doing this mountaineering have to be very aware of. Again, around here, Mount Marcy's about the only thing that maybe somebody that was compromised would start having some issues. That is about 5,000 feet. It does start becoming maybe something that would have an issue there, but not likely at the altitudes we have around here. So acute altitude sickness can happen anywhere, generally within those first kind of half a day to 2 days. Generally, about day 2 to day 3 is when you're going to have issues with this. A lot of times if you're going to these higher altitudes, I mean, and this is, acute just means quick onset. This doesn't mean the bad stuff here, but this is, a lot of times you'll be nauseous, have trouble sleeping, headache, kind of a pounding headache. That is kind of that acute altitude sickness. Obviously, if high enough altitude, we can start having more issues with this. And generally what we see with altitude sickness, the higher the altitude is, the greater the incidence. The faster you go up, generally the greater the incidence. And if you've had it before, you're generally going to be likely to have issues with it again. When you start getting up to these higher altitudes, so about that 7 to 10,000 feet, it's about 20% of people, somewhere around there, 10 to 20% of people have issues with this. Women tend to have slightly higher incidence than men, partly because lower hemoglobin, lower red blood cell levels is probably one of the bigger issues with that. You can kind of see here prevalence of kind of the lower levels of altitude sickness. Tourists at 2,000 feet here, you kind of see it goes up if you start getting a higher altitude here. Again, rapid ascent to 10,000 feet is only about 10% likely. If you rapidly ascend to 5,000 meters, that 5,000 meters versus 3,000 meters, so it's about 9,000 feet versus about 15 to 16,000 feet. Much greater likelihood there. You can see generally if you slowly ascend with experienced climbers, you're less likely to have issues with this. And again, every so often as you get up to these higher altitudes here, the HAPE is high altitude pulmonary edema. HACE is high altitude cerebral edema. These are actually the much more severe types of altitude sickness. This is fluid going into the lungs or fluid going into the brain. Why might we have these issues? A few different things here. Sometimes some people don't respond ventilation-wise quite as well to altitude as others, so maybe they didn't have as good of increase in ventilation to this acute change. They can start getting higher CO2 levels in the blood and leading to acidosis. This, like I said, will give you a continuous, it's kind of like a caffeine withdrawal headache. This continuous pounding headache. Generally going to be worse right when you wake up, or if you're exercising, it'll kind of just pound in your brain. The hypoxia leads to this vasodilation, and that is those stretch receptors kind of firing off in here that are going to have issues with this. Again, starts as you go higher altitudes here. A lot of times you'll have issues with sleeping, so you have this altered breathing pattern. A lot of times that is going to prevent you from sleeping regularly. Leads to issues with rapid eye movement. And generally, the higher you go in altitude, the more likelihood to have irregular breathing and have these sleep disruption. Ideally, to prevent altitude sickness, what you want to do is kind of go up slowly. So give your body time to get used to that altitude. There is certain steroids that can help with this one. And a lot of times you can use rescue bags if there's an issue. The other thing is, and a lot of people are doing this, especially people that are climbing Everest, using artificial oxygen to kind of supplement this so you're not having this greatly reduced oxygen levels. Like I said, there is two very life-threatening type of conditions that can happen. These both involve edema with blood pressure going up really high, and we start pushing fluids into different areas. So you can get this high altitude pulmonary edema, which is pushing fluids into the lungs, which technically means you can drown 20,000 feet above sea level type of thing, where you're getting too much fluid in your lungs, can't get enough diffusion of oxygen, and you basically drowned in fluid in your lungs. Cerebral edema is fluid getting pushed into the brain, and that one is probably the most severe of all these ones. These ones need to be treated almost immediately, and generally the treatment is to get these people from altitude back down to lower levels immediately if possible. They think the pulmonary edema comes from this pulmonary vasoconstriction, which leads to, or a clot formation in the pulmonary circulation, which leads to an increase in pressure, and we start pushing fluids into the alveoli. This is generally going to give you a shortness of breath. You're going to be coughing, tight chest, very low blood levels of oxygen, confusion, like I said, altered speech, bluing of the lips, can lead to unconsciousness. Again, generally what you're going to want to do is supplemental oxygen or a hyperbaric rescue bag, and then as quickly as possible get them down to a lower altitude. A lot of these conditions remedy as soon as you get them back down to a lower altitude. High altitude cerebral edema is even more life-threatening. Generally happens at these much higher altitudes. This is buildup of pressure in the intracranial space. Again, inability to move, inability to speak, can go unconscious from this one, and again, can lead to death. Same type of treatment. Again, as much as possible on any of these ones, if anybody starts showing signs of these, as quickly as possible, you want to remove them from altitude and get them back down to a lower altitude. A lot of times this is what will happen when people are climbing Everest. They'll do that, and then they'll have to take a group back down to a lower camp and then get them off the mountain. And again, these acute ones here, starting out, again, generally going to be tired, irritable, headache, nauseous. Again, because we are losing water other ways, you're going to have decreased urine output. Again, these edemas, those are the ones that impaired speech, impaired processing, bluish color to the face. Both of these ones severe, very severe. Both of these two down here, HACE or HAPE, are both life-threatening conditions.